So we are on Monday afternoon, and the world is waiting for our words of insight, thoughtfulness, and, well, basically near genius, Pat. Would that be a reasonable description of our conversations?
What is it Samuel Goldwyn says? Start with a climax and build up.
Yes, yes. Well, let's put it like this. What better could you be doing than listening to us? I mean, you have to relax sometime and listen to informed comment. And besides that, Pat, seriously, I think we say stuff that others are afraid to say.
Right? I'm certain of that.
Of course, there's things we're afraid to say too, but
sometimes there's things we're afraid to say.
Anyway, things are hotting up across the water. Because especially in North Shropshire, I haven't a clue where Shropshire is. Do you have a notion?
Neither have I.
It's somewhere in England. It's in England. North Shropshire.
Somewhere north of London, I presume.
And it has a local link because it is a by-election that's being held because Owen Patterson, late of this parish, am I correct, Nat? He left his seat in some ignominy because the truth was he was found to be
have accepted money
getting paid for lobbying, and it didn't look good. And then Boris tried to save him. We'll come back to Boris later on. Okay. So the question is this, Pat: are the Tories going to keep this seat? Now, remember they had a majority of 22,947 last time out. Will they win it?
Jude, you know something? Everybody's saying it looks like it could go to the Lib Dems. I am still saying it's more than likely the Tories. Jude, with a majority of 22,000, and it's very hard to divorce all these things because I know we're coming back to Boris, but I think Boris has got this sort of thing that, you know, the Tories right now, I don't know what it's about, Jude. I really genuinely, if I could explain it, and if you could bottle it, it'd be unbelievable. But right here, I suppose that the thing is, if the Tories lose it, the implications then are, right, the golden era, the halcyon days of the Johnson era are over, and that they have stopped. Dude, and a sort of grey world, I think you said this earlier in earlier conversation, Jude, he came along, he was humorous, he was different, and the grey world of Westminster here was this colourful chancellor, and everybody thought, that's great, and so on. But that veneer was very thin, and it's worn off very quickly. Dude, like the events of the last couple of weeks, you know, are just unbelievable. And I think in any other country, the Prime Minister at this stage would have resigned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's there fair. Like we're not English people, much less Brits.
Do you think? Do you think the Tories will hold on to the seat?
Well, I would have to say that the bookies think that the Lib Dems are going to take it. It isn't heavily, but they're giving odds of one. I don't know how you phrase it, but 1 to 2. In other words, you have to bet £2.
£2 to get £1.
Whereas with the Tories, you're getting something like 6 to 4. So you put down £4. Well, how does that work? You know, I'm not sure.
I know. I'm not.
The odds are longer that the Tories will win it, but not that much longer. I think there's a fair chance. I mean, people keep talking about this. Was it Sid Cup where James Brokenshire had his place? And he had a huge majority, very similar actually to Owen Patterson's, and they didn't. The Liberal or whoever it was didn't win it, but they came damn near it. They shrunk the majority down to 4,000. Now that was before all this stuff with Boris really broke. So I wouldn't. I think if I was pushed, I say they might win it. I think they might win it. But I'll tell you this.
No, the reason, Jude, you know, by the way, let's get on the record. I'd love to think they would lose this. That's absolutely love to think it. But 22,000, Jude, and it's a very, very safe
23, nearly
23. And you sort of, that's a lot of people who are going to change their mind, and they're going to turn. There's going to be all sorts of factors coming in. You know, people saying, "Oh, we've done a good job in regard to the virus. We've done this and that." I can ensure Boris is, you know, that's just the way it. And I love the way he's sticking it up to the French. And there's some people who are so pro Brexit that it doesn't matter what Boris does. It's like Trump; he can do no wrong, so they're still going to keep on voting. I know the pollsters try and factor all this in, but the pollsters have got it so wrong, so much in recent times that until I see it, I am like doubting Thomas. Until I see it, I won't believe it.
My wife would be the same way. She always sees the downside. It couldn't possibly be a good thing would happen, i.e. that the Tories be beaten. Well, now I think there's a number of factors. One is all these events that have happened in the last few days, or certainly week or more, those weren't on the cards when they fought the battle at Sidcup for James Brokenshire's seat. And they shrunk it from something like 22,000 to 4. Now, I have a feeling that what has happened in the last week or so would help to push that 4 out as well, so to speak. And they could turn it over. They really could. But this is the bad part. You said if they lose that seat, this is the beginning of the end of Johnson. I don't agree necessarily, because voters have a long reputation in Britain for giving, as they say, the government a bloody nose in by-elections where they know there's no risk. In other words, they know that won't change the government, but it sends a message to the government: don't be taking us for granted. Smarten up down there, less side deals and so on. So I have a feeling the combination of those two things, all the stuff that's been pouring out over the last week, and the fact that it's a safe thing to do to give the government a kick in the arse.
But sometimes too, the other thing happens. Like he's an 83 seat majority. You can tell the opposition to go and bugger off, and he doesn't have to listen to even his own backbenchers. But somebody like the Tory party, as I think we said last week, has always been based on, and morals don't come into it. If you're seen as a winner, how you won doesn't really count. And Boris has been seen as a winner because it keeps all these guys in their MP seats and their ministers' cars and ministerial cars and whatever. But today he is considered a liability. Now, Jude, we sort of have moved on to Boris here, right? There was last night, I just happened to catch Gogglebox. It's a program that's on about people.
Oh, it's a brilliant program. Brilliant program.
I sat and watched it. And it was almost universal. The reaction, last week about Allegra Stratton and all this. About, like there was one younger turned around and says, they were doing this when there was 500 people a day dying, across Britain. And Jude, I think there might have been a tipping point. That whole thing where the Teflon, nothing sticks to Boris. Yeah. I think from here on in, a lot could stick to Boris. And I think a lot of people might be changing their mind. Jude, what does John Bercow said? This guy stinks in the nostrils of most decent people.
Yeah, well, he certainly hasn't looked very good this last week or so. There was up to seven parties that he says didn't happen, and I mean he just tied himself in knots with regard to that, saying I wasn't at the party and that's why I left early. The refurbished apartment, which where did the money come from? They started with Owen Patterson actually. When he tried to, change the rules.
Basically dismissed the independent commissioner on standards. In other words, the Tory party were going to rewrite their own rules that their people could do no wrong.
You know what I was thinking, Pat? When Boris was on, was it last night? He was on telling us about the Omicron virus and how serious it was. I couldn't help thinking that the same word kept going through my head all the time. The Malvinas. That's Thatcher was up against the wall and she sent the gunboats out to the Malvinas or the Falkland Islands and everything changed. Yeah. And I got the impression Boris is saying, here's the thing. I'm the only guy can be trusted to really get together, get the army out, really put this in place. It would be daft to switch horses midstream now. Yeah. I'm in charge. Look at the lead I'm giving. So I was thinking, this is his effort. Now, if that effort fails, I mean, if, for example, they don't get that they don't get everybody vaccinated before the end of the year, and if they lose at North Shropshire, that I would tend to say then maybe he might be on the way out. But I'd say that word of caution, Pat.
But look at what happened last week. They introduced us. They introduced us what they call as Plan B. Yeah. Apparently, there was only about 3 ministers consulted, and the rest were rung up and told it was going ahead. That was distraction because of the absolute avalanche of media coverage about the parties that went on last Christmas. So plan B, they were sort of saying you're going to have to work from home, you're going to have to wear a mask in public, and I think you're going to have to get a vaccination cert if you want to go to a big event and so on. Apparently there's some, Jude, I'm open to correction this because I'm only sort of getting it secondhand, but some of the pundits are saying up to 53 or 54 Tory MPs are openly in rebellion about all these things. And the other thing, Jude, the big thing too is, why on earth God would anybody believe Boris Johnson or obey or look at his advice? His moral authority is gone. There were, sure, it was it last Wednesday or someone came out too, that there he was sitting at this quiz on I think it was December 15th last year, with a tinsel on him and a hat and whatever. And there was a couple of guys sitting around him, and none of them were wearing masks. And apparently the Sunday Mirror yesterday said there was a whole lot of people involved in this sort of virtual quiz, and they were all sitting around computers drinking alcohol. Now, Jude, is that a party or is that not a party?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think most people in Britain believe there were parties, and that was the long and short of it. But he can't afford to say so, and he'll avoid it as far as he can. And he's got this investigation, which will not report till probably March or something like that, at which point the ferment will have sort of died down a bit. But I suppose all parties come to an end at some stage. Do you realize, incidentally, I was looking at some of the other runners at Shropshire, and did you know that the official Monster Raving Loony Party is running? You probably expected that. But did you know that the official Monster Raving Loony, brackets, Howling Loud Hope, end of brackets, is also running?
No, I didn't know that, no.
And there's the last party that I think is worth taking note of. The last party worth taking note of is you might want to tell people, if you have any friends or relatives in North Shropshire, they might want to vote for this party. It's called the Party Party.
The Party Party.
Party.
I'd love to. Don't you have to, if you don't get a certain amount of vote?
I know the question you're asking, Pat. 2,000 quid, I think it was last time.
Sure, you just throw that down the tubes. Yeah.
But like you see, it gives them great publicity, huge publicity. They're there on the stage at a time when, several million anyway, people are watching them. You get a few drinks out of that. But anyway, so you're going with North Shropshire, staying with the Tories.
I say they just might scrape home.
And I go the other way. I say they might just lose it. And if they do, I don't think it'll be as serious as you say. I think actually, in some ways, it'll be like a catharsis. It'll let people get it off their chest. And then
there's a point. I think they lose it. There's always something. There's always a catalyst for change. If he gets away with it, I think I would agree with you. But if they lose it, I think then the sort of the tide might well have turned.
I think so. I remember, I'm trying to think of specific instances, but there were occasions in British politics when there was a by-election and people said, "My God, look, they lost that." And I think it was in Thatcher's time. And didn't make a blind to the difference. Jude,
I think your point about the Malvinas is well made, but I think last night, I get the impression last night, you're trying to look magisterial, prime ministerial, gravitas and all that. You got the impression. Wait a minute, he's never had this sort of. Last night comes on and addressing the nation. Do you ever get the impression, wait a minute, distraction? At all the hallmarks of, hey, wait a minute, this is not serious. This is what's changed that much. Omicron, it's not a joke, but there are even some scientists say it's not as serious as some of the other variants. So why didn't they have the big address the nation about them? It's just that the political tide is running against him. And dude, last night I even seemed cynical of you, and maybe that's on my part. But I thought, wait a minute, I don't believe a word's coming out of your mouth.
Of course, the two things could be true. He could be using it as a distraction, and Omicron could be really serious. I think his
moral authority is totally gone. I've now become totally cynical about Boris Johnson. I don't believe his oath.
But Pat, you're using this word moral. What is that? What's that got to do with politics?
Well, if you're the leader of a country and you want people to do as you asked, you have to be seen to be doing as I do, not as I say. And without question, Boris Johnson, there are a lot of people going, but I'm telling us to do this when he's broken all the rules himself. Jude, there's no moral authority for him.
Well, I think most people are fairly well convinced of that. But I think, you see, he has pushed the bringing in of the jury's verdict back a few months to March or whatever, when this report comes in on what happened. And by then, I think people will have moved, events will have moved on. That's my feeling.
Anyway, here's the difference, Jude. The difference between, say, remember Sleaze was pretty, remember there's cash for questions during John Major's time, but the moral authority Major had was, he was known to be totally, above board himself. There was never a question that he had. And then remember when he's called.
Well, he had an affair. Don't forget, he had an affair.
But he didn't even deny that.
No, yeah. Well, I suppose Boris hasn't denied that he's had umpteen affairs. It's just that he hasn't
confirmed it either.
Yeah. Okay, let's leave all this sleaze and muck and corruption and stench that's coming across REC, and let's go to a good news story. Apparently, the latest findings are that a salary is in the free part of our island, your part of our island. Salaries in the technology and finance sector in Ireland and the south of Ireland have increased by up to 20% in the past year. What about that then? What do you think of that, Pat?
Well, I have a son who's in that industry.
That's the end of it then.
I there's no doubt about it, that's true. Jude, I was in the house on, I think, well, certainly one occasion where in the middle of his work, he got a phone call from one of these, what do you call it, recruitment people, and I said to him, what was that about? He says, that's an offer of another job. And I says to him, and I'm just using this personally, he says, it's happening regular now. He says, Brexit has made a massive difference. He says, the number of British companies that have moved over to Ireland, particularly, I think they call it fintech, financial technology, those companies, they're looking for highly qualified people and they're looking for whatever, and they're willing to offer big salaries. And Jude, it seems to be that now that I don't know, that day in, day out. Of course, Jude, there are a whole lot of companies have also indicated they're expanding. So the jobs are out there and the competition. Jude, you have to have a fairly high degree of competence, maybe master's degrees in computer science and so on. So Jude, there's big money.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you mentioned finance, accounting and finance. The same report says also are the two other areas in high demand. So it looks like we're going to be living in a highly technical or technology dominated world. You think that's a good or a bad thing, Pat? You know the way.
I have very, very mixed views. I have a brother-in-law who only uses an old-fashioned phone. He won't get one of these modern high-tech ones. He says, I don't want people knowing where I'm. Now, I had a friend, I was talking to him one day, and I said, look, it's greatly exaggerated, about all this sort of stuff about computers and following you. He says, Pat, he says, you made the mistake of thinking that's human. He says, a computer doesn't sleep. He says, anytime anybody wants to find you, if you have on your phone and you've got your location marker on that phone, he says, they can tell where you are and what you're doing and all the rest of it.
Well, they can tell where you are, Pat. They can't. I don't know if they can tell what you're doing.
Well, right here, my one quite recently, Jude, I was in a place and I was getting a cup of coffee, and I was only out 5 minutes, and it sort of said to me, "Did you, name the place I was sort of in?" That's what drew
the conclusion from that. I guess that's right. If you're going certain places, then they'll know what you're up to. Think of several.
Give a name and a name of the place. Give it a sort of a rating type thing.
And that's very important to these places too. Of course, you never get a parcel nowadays, but the next day you get 10 bloody emails asking you how many stars would you give it, and we value your opinion and so on. Because people, oddly enough, and I'm the same. You look at, if you're going to buy something online, you look and see how many people have said this is bloody marvelous. Or is it, only a small number? Can
I stop you just one thing? There was a wee girl that worked with me years ago, and the Dairy Journal, and she'll know who is if she's listening to this. But here, she made a very good point to me. one day, every day I came in, there was an Amazon parcel, and I said to her, "Good God Almighty, do you know?" I said, "If you keep going the way you're going, there's going to be no shops left in this town." She says, "Right, my father was whatever it was, 60, and she says I looked at the local shop. She lives in Donegal, and she says I was going to buy him a watch, and it costs whatever it was, €120. She says I looked at the price, and Derry it was 100 sterling." And she says, "I can get it on Amazon for, what was it, 75 quid. She says, "I'm saving money. My dad's as happy as could be because he's getting the same watch that he saw in the shop, whatever part of any show he was in, for 120. She says, "I'm looking good," and all the rest. But now, Jude, if that keeps going, Jeff Bezos will be ruling the world, and there won't be any sort of stores left locally, or any sort of services other than maybe just serve it, with what do you call it, the petrol pumps and the wee convenience shops.
It's very hard. We've talked about this before, but I do sympathize with that. And I think it'd be a terrible thing if the high street gets wiped out. But on the other hand, another way of looking at it is this, Pat. You're saying, essentially you're implying there, I think, that you would be prepared to suffer a wee bit of financial penalty in order to support the local high street. Well, here's one for you. I wonder, what was the thought of the high street shop whenever it opened? Was it, "Oh, we'll open a shop so we can serve the community"? Or was it, "We'll open this shop, we'll make some money"?
Absolutely.
But
hold on. The shop in the high street was probably paying rent and rates. It was probably employing people. It was getting goods from suppliers. There was a chain there. Jeff Bezos, if I'm buying some sort of watch, and it's probably exported from America to Britain and or whatever, and to here, and where's the benefit to our local community?
Well, the guy that delivers it will probably, there'll be something local there.
That's about it.
But that's it. You're right. That is about it. The thing I was thinking about actually was, the way that people are always complaining that now nowadays kids all the time, they're looking at their phone and they're tapping and so on, and they're not engaging with the real world. Yeah. Well, I'm old enough to remember 20, 30 years ago when everybody was saying, kids today, all they do is sit like idiots staring at the goggle box, as you mentioned earlier on. Yeah. So you could say that at least with their phones, they're interacting with other people. They're in touch with other people. There's just other people rather than lying like a jellyfish on the sofa.
Well, actually, when I was a wee fella, I remember old television will be the ruination of the world. People will stop talking to each other, and and people getting their influence from TV and all the rest. And of course, a lot of old traditional Irish Catholics, they're bringing values that are inimical to our society. Well, maybe TV did actually bring a reflection. It did, yeah. But anyway, that's the reality of the modern world.
Yep. It is for sure. I think that's worth saying, because, when I was an English teacher, one of the things we used to give out about was kids writing. God, you couldn't get them to write. They get phones, and what do they do instead of talking to each other? They start writing. They start writing in text all the time. That's a weird thing, isn't it? Why do they not just talk to them?
Dr. Collins, as you know, a lot of now the abbreviations have almost become center stage in regard to writing.
That's okay. That's great. I sort of imagined it, if I think,
It isn't. What was it Orwell said? Once you get careless in communication, the whole sort of society, when people don't get clear messages and everything's blurred at the edges, Jude,
go away that, Pat. That's blurred because you're on the outside of it. It's not a bit blurred to those kids. Those kids look at something that'll baffle you, and they'll say, "Oh, that means that. That means that. That means that." There's even texts for Irish, little compressed phrases for.
I've seen that. I like the English MP who said "Chucky" or that. I didn't realize what he was saying.
Did you see, incidentally, that there was terrible ruction about Gerry Adams's a comic video that he made for the Foyle Search and Rescue Service?
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Pat? Was that Jude, he said "Chucky" or "la la la," and then he went to house. The house said,
"Our day will come," and then some people said that's offensive. Jude, someone. I am not downplaying the victims of IRA violence or all that sort of stuff, but it's ridiculous, and I mean ridiculous. Jude, you can find, if I say to you, "Good morning," Oh, he was very offensive how he said that. You can find anything offensive if you want to find it offensive. And I think there are certain people that are ruled out all the time when it comes to anything to do with Jerry Adams. They go to the usual suspect. Oh, I found that offensive.
Yeah, yeah. I see where I was reminded of what David Irvine said to George Mitchell at the beginning of the talks. Yeah. He said, there's one thing you'll have to understand first, Senator. And he said, what is that? That there are people in Northern Ireland who would drive 100 miles out of their way in order to receive an insult.
Yeah,
it's true.
You know, someone you'd almost swear that that nobody of the nationalist community was harmed in the making of the Troubles.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, we're all on the one side, really. You know, we're all.
I am not disputing anybody's pain, but you know, someone, I honestly, genuinely think, you know, that is looking for offence where none was intended.
Well, I think the way that these people, like such as Kenny Donaldson, if you like, pardon the expression, see it, is that it's making a figure that was once a figure of hatred and undiluted rage, making him normalized, and they don't want that. You don't want that.
Sure, remember the famous one of Martin McGuinness and Gregory Campbell. What was it? Real Lives.
That's right. Yeah, I remember well.
There was absolute mayhem. The British government wanted to know that the reason McGuinness came across actually as a normal human being. Exactly. And know this sort of thing that they wanted to portray him as a monster with two heads and so on. And what they couldn't take was this guy was actually very reasonable, actually very personable, and came across as quite a decent human being. And they just couldn't deal with it because that was not the propaganda that they were trying to send the people back in the home counties. The sort of cliche must be 100% cliche. It can't be any complication. We're dealing with a two-headed monster here. It can't come across any other way. Shinny. Okay, let's move to the good Lord Ashcroft. A man I didn't know existed until you drew my attention to him. Is this man young, old, good looking? No, I don't know a lot about him myself. I think he's a former Tory, and he's described somewhere, I think, as a businessman and a philanthropist. Now, Jude, I don't know what his background is, but he's very, very good at these polls. He does them all over the place. And I think he must have the money to do them himself. Now, for the one in Northern Ireland, they interviewed 3,000 people, which is that's a lot of people. So there was a lot of effort when they did. And by the way, Jude, I wrote it down because, you know, it's asked how they would vote in a referendum tomorrow morning. 49% said they would stay in part of the union. 41% said they would vote for unity, and 1 in 10 were undecided. And they just thought about it. Wrote down Sinn Féin, and 19 out of 20 of Sinn Féin and DUP voters voted as indicated. There's nobody changing their mind. The SDLP said 56% would vote for unity, 12% to remain. I presume the rest don't know. But here's the one I found. That's why. Sorry, Pat. Is that for a vote tomorrow? Tomorrow morning. Okay. But here's the one I wrote down that I really thought. 71% of those aged 18 to 24 said they would choose unification. That's the younger people who are going, and that's. Now, I was watching Doug Beattie on last night. I can't even remember the program it was on. I was an Irish language guy, Ian Malcolm or something. He's an academic, but he's a unionist who speaks Irish. And he asked Doug Beattie. Now, after he said Doug was very, very fair. Doug said, I accept that things from the unionists in the past towards the nationalist community were not good. But he says, we made mistakes, they made mistakes. But he says, right. He says, let's look forward to the future. And he says, I believe, this is the line I took out of it. He says, I believe in the years ahead that there'll be a unionist majority for years to come. He says, not because of a union, but he says, there's a cohort coming up the middle who like it here, who don't want to be orange or green. They like the system here. They like, the national health or whatever else. And he says, that's the cohort that I think what he meant was, and I'm putting words in his mouth here, that if unionists are smart, they reach out to. I think there's 2 points there, Pat. They're sort of similar in a way. One is that he's talking about people wanting to remain part of the union.
But the fact of the matter is the union has changed dramatically since Brexit.
Yeah.
So you're not talking about the same beast anymore. You're talking about something different. So people who in the past would have said, yeah, I'm definitely for the union, they now have to look at something different and make a decision. And I don't think Doug's quite right if he thinks in terms of one sort of state that doesn't change. The other thing is this, Pat, and this is with regard to the young people, 18 to 25 or whatever, the 78% or whatever that would want to unite Ireland. Don't forget that people change with age. You know, somebody said, no, this is an extreme example. Somebody said, if you weren't a socialist when you were 25, you had no heart. If you weren't, a Tory by the time you were 40, you had no head.
You had no brains.
So maybe these young people might be more radical now, but wait till they get settled down and get a mortgage and a wife or a husband and so on. That might change. So there's case to be made on both sides.
Jude, let me throw you one more statistic. I hate to throw a statistic, but it says Protestants, 86% said they never changed their mind on the issues. And when it came to Catholics, 64% said they never changed their mind on the issue. So in other words, but you see, it's understandable. Unionists, you have what you hold, or you want to hold what you have.
Threatened. Yes, I understand that. The one thing that really annoys me with these polls is this question: what way would you vote if there was a United Ireland border poll tomorrow? That is the stupidest question I know. I don't believe you could devise a stupider question than that, because it's asking a question about the impossible.
Yeah.
Everybody knows there's not going to be a border. You can't have a border poll tomorrow.
No, but the other thing as well, Jude, look, the last time they had a sort of prepared in this way was for Brexit. And look at breakfast as well. But see, Brexit, what a mess that turned out to be, because there was no planning for it, there was no policy, there was no guidelines, there was no rules. It was just this this is what we want, and the detail wasn't done. See, if you're talking about United Ireland, you have to put on a floor. You have to put in guidelines. You have to put on, say, here's what we're going to have a constitution. Here's what it looks like. Here's what unification, the costs of it. Here are all. By the way, the option of rejoining the Commonwealth is up for grabs. The national anthem's up for grabs. We will look at the maybe such things as the national flag, etc., 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 and so on. Those are all, and we have 5 years to discuss them. And at the end of 5 years, we will come to the conclusion, and then we'll go for a vote.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm convinced, because it comes up so regularly in these different polls, Lord Ashcroft, Irish Times poll, and so on. They always insert this question: what way would you vote if there was a United Ireland or a border poll tomorrow? And as I say, everybody would accept the fact, I think, if they thought about it for a moment, no such thing can happen. But why then do they do it? Why do they put it in? I think it's because they'll get a headline that will read the way they want it to read.
Yeah.
Why don't they start off by saying, would you be in favor of would you vote for United Ireland in a border poll in, say, the next 5 years or in 5 years' time? Yeah. Why don't they do that? Because that's what every half-sane nationalist / Republican would want to see. They don't want to repeat the same mistakes as you said of Brexit.
Yeah. Well, I remember Martin McGuinness one day, and I'm serious, in my office, my other life, saying, he said, I don't know if I'd want to join Ireland, the south of the way it is right now. That's 15 years, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He wanted changes on both sides of the border. I remember at the time being sort of surprised at, but he probably had a point.
Of course, absolutely. That really gets on my nerves. But did you see where this Lord Ashcroft's poll, or the report of it anyway, included that the people doing the surveying spoke to a Catholic in Strabane who said, we breed better than unionists. They have big TVs. We have big families.
No, I didn't see that one. No, I didn't read that. No.
That was in the report that I read. Well, pretty damn witty. I wish I'd thought of that in the first place. Anyway, we keep going over this ground, but then again, these guys keep bringing out these polls. Maybe it's a sign of insanity. Do you think, Pat, doing the same thing, expecting to get a different result?
I think what's really happened is Brexit and the demographics
Yeah.
I've sort of put it onto the front plate, big time. And, no matter what the unionists are saying, you get the impression that, that there's a bit of, what would you say, unevenness there. They're not totally happy about all this. And, and the other thing as well, of course, is they have been shafted totally by their own government. And frequently you'll find Newton Emerson bringing it up regularly. Alex Keynes bringing it up regularly. It's an issue on talkback regularly. 10 years ago, United Ireland was pretty much, say third, fourth, or fifth on a poll. If you had a list of topics, it regularly now comes up one or two.
Yeah, I remember, you see, that this thing about not trusting the Brits for Phineas Alba, and that goes right back to Carson. Wasn't it Carson that said, "What a fool I was to have trusted the Tories"? So that was 100 years ago, and they're still saying the same thing. The last thing I would say on it is this: an awful lot's being made, more and more, of this middle 1/3. This group that aren't Republicans or nationalists. They're not unionists. They could be swayed. I think too much is being made of that. I think that's always the case in any election or any vote. There's always going to be people who are going to go maybe one way, maybe another. For God's sake, Brexit. What did Boris Johnson do? He wrote 2 columns. One column.
One for it, another against it.
One way or another. So in all cases, you're on a seesaw. So I don't think they should be falling over themselves to say that there's a group in the middle who are pretty happy and they don't want to really change.
Jude, what do you say? There are definitely, I've met them, and I presume you have too. The sort of the soft nationalists, the people who don't consider themselves British or don't consider themselves Irish. They describe themselves as Northern Irish.
I think that's because for a start, I think most people dislike change. You don't like change. It's a hard thing to take change because you're not sure what way it's going to go. Whereas you know where you are, you don't know where you're going to ultimately, because things very often work out quite differently from the way you imagine them. So I think that would be a factor in people saying, "Oh, well, I'm happy enough where I am." And likewise, if you had somebody who's a unionist by sort of instinct more than reason, would say, "Yeah, I'm happy enough the way I am." Not so much because they're in love with the union, but because they don't want change. It's disrupting change,
Yeah.
You need to have courage to face up to. However, I think more and more people are realizing that it's not so much they have to change. The world around them has changed. And therefore they're going to have to adapt to that some way. Going to have to do something. And you won't get anywhere if you just sit still. However, that's a wise summation of the
what does Mao Zedong said? Without change, there is no progress.
What was it Paul Potts said? If you stand by a river long enough, you will see the bodies of your enemies eventually float past.
What a lovely thought.
With that happy thought, I will leave you.
That happy thought, Dr.
Think on it. Think on.
See you Friday.
Okay.